Our next presenter, ladies and gentlemen, is Dr. Emalinda McSpadden, and she is from Bronx Community as well. And I'm sorry for crucifying her name, I've been practicing.
Friends, for having me. I hope that I can add a little to this discourse in sort of the same way as Dr. Cotter just did, because I am also talking about student experience. Specifically, however, I'm talking about the dynamics of experience within a classroom setting as technology can be applied in a lecture situation. I think that a lot of my colleagues and myself have often wondered if many of the things that we're doing, innovative though they may feel to us, are actually working. And while we can provide a lot of different outcome measures to determine the efficacy of different applications in the classroom, we don't necessarily know if the student engagement is, I guess, real, for a lack of a better term. So what I set out to do with this project was to understand a little bit from both perspectives, the professors as well as the students, of their engagement with technology and their engagement with each other as a result of their engagement with technology. So let me take you kind of quickly through what I did. First of all, the setting. Now, I am too from Bronx Community College, and we have varying degrees. Now, I'm a psychology professor in the social sciences department, and among the members of my department, we are a really big department, and we have a lot of different approaches in the classroom. So some of us are very tech handy and tech embracing, and some of us are extremely analog. So you run the gamut. Now, what we generally tend to know, and if you look at the research, it's a no-brainer, and of course I'm preaching to the choir at this conference, but technology and internet access are intended to aid learning and connection. And we see research that supports that, in fact, it does aid retention of information, memory, and so on. However, we do see contradictory research findings. For example, well, I'll run into this a little bit later, but we see that we have distractions that result from technology use in classrooms. Sometimes the technology use, as is evidenced here, when you guys zone out in about 5 minutes, can sometimes provide a focus point for your eyeballs, and you may not, in fact, be paying attention. So we're seeing some stuff going on in the classroom, but having a hard time measuring it. So given all these different contradictory research findings on things like cognition, attention, classroom technologies, it's really difficult to understand what best practices are. Also, these are, domain specific. Certain areas are a little easier and lend themselves a little better to technology use in classrooms than others. So I sort of started thinking about the issue in terms of breaking it down, like I said before, into this sort of, dual model of professor on the one side and student on the other. So looking at student use of classroom technology, if you ask students how to rate their devices that they feel are most important to their personal academic success, they're going to put laptops at the very top at 85. Tablets, smartphones, and ebook readers in succession. That smartphone percentage is steadily increasing. I know many of my students do everything on their phone, including write papers, to my chagrin. Then you have the question as to whether or not students want more and more academic resources on their mobile devices, which they do. However, there's a little bit coming later that makes it kind of dismal that they do want that. But 67% of students' smartphones and tablets are being used for academic purposes. That is self-reported, however, and a student's version of academic purposes may vary very greatly from what we consider to be an academic purpose. So just putting that out there. On the teacher's end, basic classroom technology use includes things like PowerPoints and videos and websites and so on. Those have been around for a long time. And then the use of Blackboard as well. Some folks have been integrating Blackboard into the actual lecture setting. Beyond that, more recent classroom applications of technology include things like Pinterest, YouTube, podcasts, integrating blogs. Second Life is sort of fading, but some people still use it. And then proprietary applications that are produced by different publishers. But at the end of the day, teachers' main concern is whether or not A, they're getting the right kind of training to support the things that they want to do, and B, whether or not the things that they're doing are in fact effective in terms of what they want for their students to grasp of their material. So I'm a psychologist, and when I consider this from a psychological research perspective, I started thinking about the basic elements of what's required in a classroom to succeed if you're a student. We have to think about attention span. We have to think about cognition. So really briefly, if you look at attention span among college undergrads, the first attention lapse will happen 30 seconds in. That is as quick as you lose them. They'll come back, unless they fall asleep. But they do go away very quickly. So a lot of approaches using technology has often been to sprinkle as many bells and whistles in as possible to keep students visually and auditorily engaged in an effort to thwart this phenomenon. However, it continues, right? So as you're in a lecture, the lapses occur more frequently, and then about every 2 minutes by the end of the lecture. So that's fun. Also, cognition and information processing. If you get a limited amount of exposure to something, it is far less likely that you're going to process it into your long-term memory, which is sort of the goal landing pad. So if you are going to flash something up on a screen, be it for maybe, I don't know, you lecture on a topic, the screen is up, it's there for maybe 5-6 minutes, the student instantly shows you the top of their head as they write down whatever's on the screen. Who knows if they're listening to you, right? But in that event, that's not yet going to be processed far beyond your short-term or working memory. They keep it long enough to put it on the page, and then they move on. So that doesn't qualify as rehearsal, meaning that they're not necessarily going to get this unless they go back and rehearse it on their own time. And oftentimes students think, well, if I took a picture of the PowerPoint or if I have it on Blackboard and I can access it later, I'm good. Not so much. Finally, the efficacy of classroom methods that are being used. Students with the lowest GPAs are the ones who tend to use their smartphones for academic purposes more than those with higher GPAs. Yeah, it's dismal. And it's interesting. But it's also, it begs the question, if students are clamoring for this availability of resources on their smartphones, on their tablets, and they're just, and truly, I teach a couple of intro psych courses where we're using products that are entirely embedded online. They're textbooks, quizzes, and so on. In the hopes that, well, if you have it available to you on your phone, well, you'll just access it more. Not so much. So the current findings, and this is 2013, is that ebook readers, as well as using mobile devices as your primary access point for materials for a class, actually seem to have a relationship with lower GPAs on the whole. Also, 50% of students watch lecture videos on a regular basis, but 40% watch several weeks in a big moosh. So, I mean, I can understand a lot of people undertaking the practice of binging Netflix, but you're not supposed to be doing that with this kind of thing, and yet that's what's going on. So then, when we step back and look at the problem, we can sometimes consider it as a generational one. For example, if you think of this as, and we've been batting this terminology around plenty, so again, preaching to the choir, I accept that, but the majority of current undergrads are digital natives, and the majority of their professors are digital immigrants. Now, many have immigrated and become relatively fluid, but they're still immigrants, and that's important because the experience is entirely different. Right? This is a famous quote from Presky, which is where digital immigrants and digital natives actually was coined, right? Our students have changed radically, and today's students are no longer the people our educational system was designed to teach. So a lot of people just sort of throw their hands up, hope for the best, and put up their next PowerPoint, but here's the assumption. Traditional classrooms were built for a very different way of teaching and learning than folks are trying to entertain. So we have a digital immigrant professor's educational history that is devoid of any of this. I know for myself that I did have some, maybe 2 really up-and-coming professors in college who were using PowerPoint steadily, but the rest of them were analog, and you just had to hold on to your coffee cups. But the experience of being a student in a technologically advanced classroom, to them, to the professor, completely foreign. So I decided to do a quick project to look at classroom experiences of students and teachers. I was specifically looking at classrooms where technology was heavily used. And I left that definition of use of technology relatively broad. But the rationale is that, we're trying to build this bridge here. And I did this project as a qualitative research project. The reason being, I'm looking at experience. I could have done a survey and taken outcome measures or what have you, but instead I decided I wanted to do some interview protocols and then look at the interview data and then find themes within that interview data. So let me show you a little bit of that. My participants were both students and professors among my colleagues in social sciences. And I, like I said, decided to choose specifically classes that were using technology at least for 50% of their lecture time. And again, focusing on lecture time, not stuff that you're doing outside the classroom that incorporates technology. And as you can see, the different technology use is pretty vast. I got 9 professors, 24 students. That looks like a small N. But I did an existential phenomenological analysis. Now, when you do this kind of analysis, which is based on, existential phenomenology, it's very intense reading and rereading. And the point is to try and find within the verbatim data themes that expose themselves across the different protocols. So I looked for themes that the professors and the students had in common with each other about their experience with technology in classrooms. And I also looked for themes that just the students had and the professors did not, or just the professors had and the students did not. Hope that made sense. But that was my idea, and these were my findings. Real quick, I want to take you through the questions that I asked. And I asked them of both the professors and the students alike. Of course, I sort of finagled them as appropriate, depending on who I was asking. Just to describe all the technology use in the class, then to think about an example of a single time, and I use what's called a critical incidence method, where you ask somebody to tell the story of a time when this thing happened, and in that telling of the story, they can give you an idea of how they saw it, how they experienced it, how they felt it, and it gives you a lot of in-depth information. So I asked about a time when they were in that particular class that they described in the first question, and found technology to be very helpful, or helping the classroom experience. As much detail as they could give me, the more the better. Second, I asked them of a time where the adverse was happening, where they found technology to be unhelpful to their classroom experience or to their learning. The third thing, in terms of this question sequence, was a personal observation of whether or not they consider themselves technologically savvy. And I left that to their own understanding of what savvy meant. But did they feel comfortable using technology? Did they feel, as well, if their professors were, or their students were comfortable using technology? Did they think more or less should be done? Does the experience of being in an analog class vastly differ from that of a technologically enhanced class, and how? And then have you ever felt, and this is slightly different from the above questions, but have you ever felt overly dependent on technology? Have you ever had the sense that if it wasn't for technology, you'd be sunk? And that's a very different answer coming from a student versus a professor. So my findings, and I found this to be a hopeful thing, I don't know how you'll take it, but I found more convergent themes than I did divergent themes. So in other words, the students and the professors had more in common than they didn't. So the first theme that came out of the data, almost everybody, when it was a convergent theme, almost everybody that I interviewed had it to some degree, was that technology is a distraction in the classroom. Now, the students felt like, and I've pulled up these quotes from the interview protocols just so that everybody can sort of sense it. When my boyfriend texts me, I tell him I'm in class, but I still pull out my phone and I deal with the text, and I lose that moment. Very, very common discussion about the phone and the tether that one feels to the phone. On the professor end, I let my students keep their phones on during class. It's not realistic for a lot of them to put it away. A lot of our students, I have a policy in my classroom that sort of warns my students, listen, if you need your phone because your kid's in daycare or you have a job thing coming up, will you just let me know in advance and let's have common courtesy. But a lot of professors do have that policy of, okay, you need your phone, I get it, but it does mean that you pay a price in losing their attention. The second theme I found was an expectation of participantability. I kind of like this because it means that everybody's really gracious and humble and thinks that the other people are better than they are. So the students actually felt that the professors knew a great deal of what they were doing, and yet it was specific. So the students felt that they were very, very good at their phone usage, but when it came to the real computers, as a lot of them put it, well, yeah, my professors got it down. The professors, on the other hand, felt the same way, but gave a great deal of credit to their students, as if to say that the students were very, very keenly aware of how to do things. They maybe just didn't choose to. But everybody was very gracious on that point. The third theme was there was an overwhelming endorsement for overall use of technology. So everybody's on board, technology is necessary. They felt it really helped. The only time I don't think technology is helpful was when it isn't working, which unfortunately in a couple of my classrooms is often the case. But that's telling. So the only bad technology is a technology that won't plug in, right? And then of course professors really understand the value of using it. It adds another voice. It lends another opinion, perhaps. It takes you outside of the classroom for a second, which is really valuable. And the last convergent theme was technology as a hindrance to creativity in the classroom setting. What was interesting to me is that I somewhat expected this in the professors' end of the discussion, not as much in the students, but it turns out they are keenly aware of this. Student 7 here said that I get that it's more convenient for professors to use technology. They just click, click, click. Writing on the board changes it up sometimes, though. I pay attention differently when he does that. With technology, you know you can sort of doze off. Mixing it up can be good. And the professor feels that tether as well. So oddly enough, I have found, and sort of aside from the other interview protocol, when I talked to some of the other professors, they were like, it's almost a blessing when something breaks, because it gives me a chance to just do my thing and go rogue. Then we have the 3 divergent themes. Really quickly, divergent theme 1 was a certainty of the fact that technology that was being used works. So students are gung-ho. They're like, yeah, of course technology works. Who ever heard of a classroom that works without technology? But professors are constantly questioning themselves, questioning their methods, and questioning whether or not what they're doing is effective. And that, every single professor had something to say about. The second divergent theme was satisfaction with the amounts of technology use. Students are happy with the level of technology that they receive, especially specific to these classes, mind you. But on the whole, these students were reporting being happy with how much their professors were using. Professors, on the other hand, always felt like they could do more and should do more and felt underprepared or undertrained. So there's always this feeling of not quite having enough to offer the student. And finally, the last divergent theme I found was a view of technology as necessary in order to have a quality lecture experience. So the differences are interesting, but I think that there are bridges to be built here. And this might also inform the way in which perhaps administrations could lend to training some of their professors and ways in which professors could help their students and themselves to better make technology work for them in classrooms. Thank you so much.